Welcome to Forge the Man, professional excellence meet vocational clarity. Through the intercession of Mary, Mother of Fairest Love, and the teachings of Saint Jose Maria Escrivá, we help Catholic men sanctify their work and find their mission. Whether you are called to build a family or to serve the kingdom in the world as a single man, the forge is hot and the hammer is ready. Let's get to work. Joining us today is Ray Tittmann. Ray is the head of his own law firm, where he handles some of the biggest insurance cases in the country. But he didn't get there by accident. He spent years of mastering the fine print and learning how to outthink the competition. He's here to share how he prepared for that high-pressure world and how you can use his blueprint, specializing in a niche and out-preparing the other guy to find success in your own career. Ray, welcome.
Thank you, Paul. This is a fantastic endeavor you've got going here, and I'm excited I can be a part of it in any small way.
Well, Ray, would you just introduce yourself to the audience? Tell us a little bit about yourself before we get in the interview.
For sure, yeah. So I went to Thomas Aquinas College for undergraduate, graduated in 1994, and then Notre Dame for law school, graduated in 1997. So I'm approaching 30 years as a lawyer now. And I've also been married for 30 years. I got married my last year of law school, so on the same track there. And we have 6 children, 2 of whom are grown and married. 3 are still in college and just 1 left in high school. I practice specifically in a very narrow area of the law. It's insurance. And even though that sounds super boring, it's actually one of the most intellectually intriguing areas. It's very cutting edge because insurance is always on the cutting edge of new technology. So right now we're heavily involved in cyber insurance and AI, and we in fact just did a big presentation for our clients this week on quantum computing. And so because insurance tends to lead the market in regulating new business, because you can't start a new business without insurance, we're always on the cutting edge of new technology. And so as old and as boring as insurance sounds, it's actually a super interesting area of law that I really do recommend to a lot of people.
Wow, that's great. Ray, could you share your educational background? Take us through high school, college, and law school. So for those who might be considering law, or even if not, how important this is, or maybe some of the things you learned along the way.
For sure, yeah. So I went to Crespi Carmelite, which is a Catholic Carmelite school here in Los Angeles for high school, and then Thomas Aquinas College, which is a liberal arts school. It's relatively small, but it's been around for over 50 years, and I think it's actually the best preparation for law school. And then, as I mentioned, Notre Dame for law school. I strongly recommend to anyone who's thinking about law to very carefully look at Thomas Aquinas College. It really is the best preparation, I think, literally in the entire country. You study the great books, and you struggle through all the most important, difficult concepts that exist in Western civilization, and you work through it, the students together in conversation, led by a tutor who's an expert in the field, asking questions and guiding us along the way. And so you're really forced to present your ideas, articulate your ideas, defend your ideas, but also be flexible about them, because you're going to get pushback from somebody else, and together you're going to work slowly towards the truth. And that's exactly what you do as a lawyer. You're really struggling through ideas. You're having to learn how to articulate them, defend them, but you also need to be flexible and not be too attached to your own ideas to be a good lawyer. So I strongly recommend anyone who's thinking about law school to consider Thomas Aquinas College.
There's this Home Depot case, I think it was 360 Law, right? This sort of ESPN of lawyers. You were the MVP in 2019. Can you speak to that? Talk to us a little bit about what that was, what happened. This will give the audience a little idea as to what kind of work you do.
Yeah, no, I love the ESPN reference, because Law 360 is the leading legal journal that exists right now, and all the most important cases that are being published these days all get talked about in Law 360. So they do a annual review segment by segment within law, and so it was back in 2019 when I won the Law 360 MVP award in the field of insurance. So it was quite an honor. We get to handle a lot of very interesting, as I mentioned, cutting-edge cases. I'm working on one right now. It's a coverage case against Zoom. Zoom got sued. We're not using Zoom, so I think I can say all this. Zoom got sued for taking your data and sharing it with essentially selling it. So they would, like, as you would log in, they would have access to your computer, and then they would scrape your data and sell it to people like LinkedIn or Facebook who are trying to create profiles on you.
Right.
So they got sued in a privacy lawsuit and turned into a huge coverage dispute that I got to handle. So as I mentioned, insurance is surprisingly very interesting.
During your time at TAC, you read the great books. And could you share why reading is like really important professional development and how it helps you in your career?
Yeah, so I think studying the liberal arts, well, first of all, it has great practical impact, right? Because what you do, frankly, I think in any profession, to be a critical thinker is probably the most important skill set. So being able to think outside the box, think creatively, be able to articulate your ideas. It's like a dying art, and especially in an AI world where people whose education has been all about memorizing and spitting information back, suddenly computers can do that better than the smartest Harvard-trained student. But going to a place like TAC and studying the liberal arts and reading Aristotle and St. Thomas teaches you to think for yourself. And so it has great practical impact. But I think there's even a more important fundamental aspect to it, and that is knowing how to live your life, knowing what is going to make you happy. What is happiness? You're kind of unlocking the key to life. And so you could go off and get a very practical oriented education and maybe in your first job hit the ground running very quickly. But when the hard questions start to come your way, you don't have a framework in which to think about them. And so studying and reading the great books, and frankly reading any books, is really the key, I think, to knowing how to answer the hard questions as the going gets tough in your life. They teach you how to think. And that's a dying skill these days. If you can't think, you can't succeed in life. And you will find yourself depressed and won't know how to get out of it. And so being able to think and seeing where you fit in the universe and what your end is, what your relationship to God is, those are the most important things. Because if you've got your foundation solid, right, you're looking around the world on a solid ground that you know how you fit into things, right, then you can take on any challenge that comes your way. But if all you've been taught to do is memorize things and spit it back, AI's coming for your job, number one. But also, I don't know that you can be happy in that way. I will say, I think it's super important to talk to people, right? You mentioned kicking the tires. I think that's the right way to think about it. Every individual person has to kind of decide for themselves and figure out what's the best fit for them. So my first 3 children went to TAC, and my 4th children wants to go to UCLA. And I think for him and the background he had, he went to a wonderful high school at St. Monica's in Pasadena. And so I don't think he needs TAC maybe as much as some of my older kids did. So I think everyone has to decide for themselves and figure it out.
Yes. So what you're saying is, hey, let's not just, what they put for us to consume, there's probably other things. Like I went to the state schools and there was many good teachers, but there was certain ideas or thinkers that we were not introduced to. And I think maybe at Thomas Aquinas, they're going to kind of pull away from that, right? Is they're going to introduce you some of the top thinkers and also allow you to be a thinker.
Yeah, exactly. And I really want to emphasize the last part of what you just said. So yes, they're going to introduce you to the greatest thinkers and a lot of thinkers that many schools will shield from you. But more importantly, it teaches you to be a thinker, because at the end of the day, you're the one that has to explore ideas and figure it out and recognize when something is being pushed on you, right? If you turn on the TV today, pretty much every news station you will find has a narrative that they're pushing on you. And so, and there's some good narratives and there's some bad narratives, right? I'm not saying all narratives are bad and false. There can be good narratives, but the main point is you as a critical thinker have to recognize when something is being pushed on you so you can challenge it and test it. And maybe it ends up being true, right? I'm not saying you reject everything. I'm not advocating nihilism or anything like that. But you need to be able to ask the question and challenge it and test it and see if it's true.
Yeah, I remember when I was introduced to the Barclay is his name, Berkeley, and he talks about idealism, right? And it's almost like you reject what you see, right?
Right.
So I think things like that, right? Like you know instinctively something's wrong with this thinking. Ray, if you were go back when you were at TAC at 22 years old on graduation day, what is one piece of advice you would give about the gap between where Ray was and where he's going to be?
I would have told myself to get a mentor, not just get one mentor, but get many mentors, because you can give one piece of advice and then that might be relevant to one struggle or challenge that you're facing in that moment. But 6 months later, the question you need answered is a completely different one. And so it's kind of like if a genie pops down and says, "I give you one wish, what do you ask for?" I ask for 1,000,000 wishes. And when you have a mentor, that's what it's like. It means every time a new challenge faces you, you can get them on the phone and ask another question. What's it like to practice this kind of law? How do I know if I want to be a lawyer or not? What's the right way to test it? What's the most important year in law school? What are the different kinds of law firms I should start at? Should I start at a big firm or a small firm? Right? There's 1,000 small questions that you'll be confronted with as you progress in both your education and your professional path, and for that matter, your personal path. How do I know if this is the woman I should marry? There's 1,000,000 questions that are going to come your way. They're going to be hard questions. And I think that the young 22-year-old Ray tried to just struggle and feel my way in the dark, kind of intuiting answers to hard questions. And if I could tell 22-year-old Ray, go get a bunch of mentors and have regular conversations with them, I could have posed each one of those hard questions to them, gotten some advice. It doesn't make it a piece of cake. You're still going to have to answer hard questions and struggle, but at least you've got the advice of somebody who's done it before and can share their story with you. This is what I did. This is how I learned from my mistake. You can now learn from my mistake. So get a mentor, and then the subtext of that, I would say, is be a mentor. Because there's somebody younger than you that needs that same advice, right? If you're a senior in college, there's a freshman in college that doesn't know what to do and doesn't know what classes to take and doesn't know what are the right professors or what those professors, preferences are and how they like to hear things. There's someone that needs your advice. So be a mentor and get a mentor.
Yeah. And I think it's like we don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? It's already been invented. Ray, there's a lot of people would say, how do I approach somebody like Ray Tittmann? This guy's got his law firm. He deals with big companies. Like how do you approach a man like yourself or like somebody at the top of their career? I mean, that would seem a little intimidating for a young person.
Well, flattery gets you everywhere. But seriously, it's funny you asked that, because I've been doing a lot of work at my alma mater and trying to help kids. And one of the common responses I get when I say go out and get a mentor is they feel like they're using people. I'm just trying to form a relationship to get information or to potentially get a job, and that feels like I'm just trying to take advantage of it, and it doesn't seem authentic. And I will say, certainly from my perspective, and I think, Paul, you can back this up because you've been a mentor to my own kids, for example. I take such pleasure and joy and satisfaction in being able to help somebody, because I just remember being there, and I remember not knowing and didn't even know that I didn't know and needed to ask somebody. And so I just feel for these kids who are trying to, especially now. I mean, it's a tough road for a young kid. The world is changing. Things are so expensive, especially here in Southern California. So I take great joy in being able to help somebody. And so don't be afraid. You're not taking advantage of me. And if I'm too busy, I'll just say no, right? Like, be respectful of people's time. There will be times when someone just doesn't have the time to give, and then you go on to the next person. But by and large, people who are in my position, they want to pay it forward. We are fulfilled. We are fulfilling our vocation as members of the body of Christ when we get to give advice to somebody who's up and coming and needs that advice. And there's some practical pieces of that too. Keep it short. I usually advocate to my young students when they're looking for a mentor, ask for a 15-minute conversation and cut it off at 15 minutes, right? You've got your questions planned in advance, and when you get to the 15-minute mark, you offer to end the conversation. If somebody wants to continue it, that's fine. But promise on the front end, I'm asking for 15 minutes of time with you. Stick to it, and then send a handwritten thank you note. You have no idea how powerful handwritten thank you notes are. I just took some lawyers that I'm pitching to be clients of mine out to a nice lunch, and I wrote a handwritten note. And you would have no idea the response you get back from something like that, because it's just no one does that anymore. It's like text and email if you're lucky. So keep it tight and handwritten notes.
Yeah, I think that like common courtesy, show your appreciation. I know on the fire department, that was kind of a custom. Whenever you came by, you'd bring a little gift and you dress appropriately, right? You don't want to talk to a top lawyer in gym shorts and a tank top. Let's say that there's somebody listening to our conversation today, and maybe they don't want to be a lawyer, but what advice could you still give them that applies to maybe all professions in discerning your vocation, and then maybe habits that you need to have in order to outwork the competition and to achieve your goals?
Yeah, so I do think that, and the mentorship answer actually does provide a lot of help on that front too, because it's going to be different in each profession. The first thing I would say is when the world tells you to follow your passions, that's terrible advice. My advice to you is follow your opportunities, not your passions. Because the world is so big, there's so many different ways to make a living and find happiness as a 18-year-old, as a 22-year-old. You have no idea what all the opportunities are for you out there, one of which might be the perfect fit, right? So like if you ask an 18-year-old, what's your passion? It might be I want to play in a band, or I want to ride horses, or I like fast cars, right? Put all that out the window, right? There may be metaphors for driving fast cars and riding horses and playing in a band that will make you some money, but you've got to kind of leave that passion a little bit behind, right? It'll happen. It'll happen. Like I now have a passion for insurance law. I never would have guessed that, right? And so the world is so big. Put your passion aside, look for your opportunities, but have those mentors, right? So start to think about, okay, here's the top 3 professions I'm thinking about. And if I have 3 mentors in each of those professions, I can start to get a feel for what it's like to be a lawyer or an engineer or a fireman. But you can't know without having those conversations. That's why those conversations are so important. You can ask people, what's your day-to-day like? What's the skill set that's needed? How can I test if this is good for me? So, for example, in law, if you're thinking about law, the first thing I always tell kids is study for the LSAT, because a couple things happen when I say that. First of all, most people are too lazy to study for the LSAT, so they don't do it, and then they don't ever come back to me. I never hear from them again, right? That's a pretty good sign you're not meant to be a lawyer. If you're not willing to put in that work to study for the LSAT, right? That's a way for me to weed them out or help them, weed themselves out of the profession. But if I say, go study for the LSAT for 3 months and come back to me, and they've been disciplined, they've enjoyed the process, they found the word games challenging and interesting, and they come back and they say, I spent 3 months and I'm getting pretty good scores, what do you think? It's like, okay, now you're ready to go to step 2. But in each profession, it's going to be a slightly different answer to your question. And that's why the most helpful general advice I think I can give you is to have those mentors and have these conversations as to each one of these professions.
Ray, I think you and I we both have a love for sports, especially for the Fighting Irish football team. But it seems like a lot of times people push this idea of passion, hey, you can probably play pro ball if you really work hard. I think 2% of all high school athletes go to Division I sports, play sports. And of the Division I athletes trying to go pro, only 2%. And I think the average athlete that does make it to pros stays 3 years. So a lot of times not realistic, right? So I think your point is let's live in the real world, right? Let's live in the real world, because we could be wasting our time maybe if we're not real with ourselves.
No, that's right. I remember my son. We used to watch Notre Dame football. There's my Notre Dame hat. We used to watch Notre Dame football together, and he's a big fan, and I'm a big fan, and he's probably about 12 years old. And he says, "Hey, Dad, do you think if I worked really hard every day, and busted my butt and practiced all the time, you think I could play football for Notre Dame?" And I looked him straight in the face. I said, "Nope, no way." And the poor kid, is streaming down in tears, right? But that's something you need to hear, right? Like there's intrinsic challenges that exist, and you just have to have a certain amount of realism. But that doesn't mean you won't find your passion and be incredibly happy. It just means you can't define that end of your professional path when you're at that age, right? You sort of have to let those opportunities come to you. God will guide you. Your mentors will guide you, and you will find the passion, but you just can't know where that end is going to be. I never would have guessed I'd be an insurance lawyer when I was 22 years old.
Yeah, maybe if you're 6'5" and the fastest guy in the state of California, you might encourage him to play for Notre Dame, right?
Exactly.
You know, Ray, I've read something, but you mentioned Aristotle, and I know you talked about Thomas Aquinas, and I think those are some of the greatest thinkers that we've had. Is there some value to spend a little time learning what these men had to say? Could you offer some like some insights into those thinkers on how it might help you be a happier person and a better person?
Yeah, when you see what the end is in your life, every action you take is towards that end. That's the best guarantee of happiness you can find. And so when you ignore those thinkers and don't ask those hard questions and don't have some exposure to the liberal arts and to philosophy and to Aristotle and Thomas and frankly the teachings of the Catholic Church, suddenly your life is going in different directions and you're making decisions that, some of which are the right ones and some of which are the wrong ones, and you kind of become scattered mentally, and that ultimately leads to unhappiness. And it's funny, the people with the greatest means in this world are most likely to be the least happy, right? Because it's not the financial means that's the key to happiness. It's seeing the order in your life, that you are ordered ultimately to God. And when you can make every decision that's based on that order, that's the key to happiness. So reading Aristotle and Thomas and studying the liberal arts is kind of like having the key to life. And I absolutely think that's the most important education you can get in college.
Ray, we've talked about reading a little bit, and reading's not easy, is it? I mean, I know a lot of people are not accepted at TAC. Can you speak to the importance of maybe engaging a difficult read? It's almost like going to the weight room, right? I mean, or running or doing calisthenics. That the body is not going to be properly formed or shaped if you don't have a regular practice of working out. Whereas the mind, which is superior, also needs to engage and to have those muscles exercise.
Right. I mean, and I'll speak in particular from the standpoint of the law. I mean, the tool, the tool that the lawyer uses and practices in is the word, whether it's the written word or the spoken word or the read word, right? Everything we do is words. So, we spend a third of our day reading, we spend a third of our day writing, and we spend a third of our day speaking. So you have to be really good with words. And the way you get there is just reading. It's just reading. It's just practice. And so I think from a young age you should be reading. I think you should also try to really focus on expanding your reading. I'm very tempted to focus just on nonfiction and frankly just on law. I think I'm a better lawyer when I'm also reading fiction. And so and it doesn't come natural to me, but I force myself to join book clubs. My wife is a very good reader, and so when we do our book clubs together, I learn a lot from her. But I just think reading of all sorts, and don't limit yourself to assigned reading. You should always be having something on the side that you're reading for fun. And I want to make a plug for one particular book, which has been a bit of an inspiration for me as a lawyer, and that's Sun Tzu's Art of War. And there's a particular line in there that I love. It's win first and then go to war. Because if you want to be a great lawyer, you do all of your planning in advance, and what court you're going to be in, what jurisdiction, who's going to be the first to file, who are going to be your witnesses. You've already done the research, and so you're not going to file a case until you already know you've got the law on your side. So if you do all of that planning in advance, by the time you've actually engaged in a battle, you've already won. And I think it's a lesson to be a good lawyer, but I think it's a lesson for life too. If you've done all of the homework and you've kicked the tires and you've got your mentors and you've had these conversations, by the time you're ready to step onto campus, you've already won the war because you've done so much of that prep work. You've put yourself in the right place to succeed. And so that would be one of my parting pitches to you is win first and then go to war.
That almost sounds like John Wooden's little phrase, like those that fail to prepare are preparing to fail.
Yes, exactly.
Ray, can you also speak there's a lot of guys that probably are blue collar and maybe they're an engineer, electrician, plumber, but Can you speak like to work, right? The importance of, I mean, some people are not going to be lawyers, and some people have different traits, but can you speak to like the importance of like doing your work well and pursuing excellence, and how you probably receive services from some of the people that work for you?
St. Josemaria was once asked, what's a higher profession, intellectual or manual trade? And his answer was, whichever is done with the most love. If you go back and look at starting from the great two commandments that our Lord left for us, right? It was love God and love your neighbor. It's all about love. And so whether we are doing something that's, highfalutin and full of intellectual thought, or whether we're changing our child's diaper, whichever of those acts you're doing with the greatest love is the greater act. So I think first, get rid of this notion that like, oh, the most intellectual thing is the higher thing. It's like, no, it's the thing that you do with love. And so when you do your work with love, whatever that work is, whether you're a janitor, a lawyer, a doctor, whatever the thing is, as long as you do it with love for your coworker, love for your employees, love for your clients, love for everyone around you that you come into contact with, then that's what you're doing the greatest. And I would say too that if you recall from the Garden of Eden, right, the command to have dominion over the earth was not a punishment of the fall. That was a command that existed prior to the fall, right? So it's because of the fall that it's by the sweat of our brow. But that command is part of our intrinsic vocation, right? It goes back to why we study the liberal arts. When you see that work is part of your end, it's part of what God has called you to do, then you realize it doesn't matter what it is, as long as I do it well, as long as I do it with love, then I'm fulfilling a call and I'm doing the highest thing.
Yeah, very good, very good. Ray, as we wrap up, like what would be an action item for your audience in preparation for his professional work?
Yeah. Get a mentor, be a mentor. I said it before and I'll say it again. You can't make the hard decisions that are going to come fast and furious in your life if you don't have the advice, probably starting with your own father. Your own father should be your number one mentor. But, if in addition, find people that have gone through what you're going through right now, that are, a step ahead of you. So if you're a freshman in college, find a senior in college, or someone who's just graduated from college. If you're thinking about law school, find a law student, find a lawyer, find a mentor, and be a mentor.
Well, Ray, thank you very much for your time and your words of wisdom. And I'd like to thank you for joining us in the Forge today. Discernment isn't a one-time event. It's a daily yes to God's providence. As you navigate your professional growth this week, pray for the courage to follow where he leads, into the deep waters of marriage or the dedicated service of the single life. May Mary, Mother of the First Love, be your guide and your protector. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord in the midst of the world.
Amen.